This trial is the first war crimes case before the Kosovo Specialist Chambers. For the victims participating here, it is hugely important to finally see this trial drawing to a close and gaining more clarity. Clarity on the scope of responsibility of the accused, his guilt or innocence, and the sentence that the panel may decide on, as well as the reparations they're entitled to. The prosecution has already described in detail the conditions imposed on the victims and the harrowing abuse they endured. The cruel treatment they were exposed to was a serious attack on their human dignity, and it triggered immense suffering. And what is important to highlight from the perspective of victims is again this additional dehumanizing aspect, making them feel like or even worse than animals, wishing some of them to actually death to come to wait for their death. These conditions were combined with active acts of torture, inflicting severe physical and mental pain and suffering. The perpetrators, the accused, seemed to seek to punish those, and I cannot emphasize this enough, wrongly suspected of collaborating with the enemy or being accused as thieves, wrongly accused of this. Torturous acts, beatings that seem to seek to intimidate those with different political views. We have heard more of that from the specialist prosecutor yesterday, or targeted for other unknown reasons. Burning, beating, electrocuting, mock executions, all those acts left the victims scarred forever, physically and psychologically. The prohibition of torture is absolute, and it's one of the oldest regulations among the rules of war. And nothing ever justifies inflicting any form of torture. I have said this in my opening statement, and I will say it again here, as this is a core message that this trial needs to convey. The victims in this case all shared the feeling of how important it was to defend the people of Kosovo against Serbian persecution. But the message needs to be clear that torture is never justified. A just aim does never justify unjust means. It deserves some special attention because the surviving direct victims in this case were all clearly shaken by the fate of their fellow prisoner who was murdered. It has left many people traumatized, vulnerable, and continues to impact their lives to this day. We have heard in detail, and it has been described yesterday as well, how one victim was singled out amongst those arbitrarily detained and tortured. Indeed, the surviving victims who testified described how the murdered victim had been repeatedly tortured more than anybody else. He wasn't able to walk or stand any longer. He had, as one victim had said, and we heard yesterday, been massacred. He was more dead than alive. He was later found buried in a shallow grave in close proximity to the detention compound. And the body had been decomposing, indicating that the death must have occurred sometime before he was found. The victims not only offered their own testimony as evidence for the torture they suffered, they also offered the scars on their bodies and minds as further evidence. independent experts, as suggested by victims' counsel and ordered by Your Honours, the trial panel, examined some of the direct victims. And these experts confirmed in their reports that the victims' bodies show multiple scars and very significant and distinct impairments that are fully consistent with the torture, with the torture described. It is very powerful evidence. It also documents the psychological impact the crimes have had on victims. They continue to suffer from post-traumatic stress and relive that horrific time in nightmares and flashbacks.